Well, hello, everybody. Here we are for part 4 of Rudolf Steiner on the Grail language. My name is John Barnwell. I'm here north of Detroit, and I'm here with Joe Visconti, the fascinating individual who happens to be living in his current incarnation in West Hartford, Connecticut. He's president of the American Shakespeare Theatre, an Emmy Award winning film producer, and we're going to be continuing our exploration of the Grail mysteries of Rudolf Steiner. And isn't that all wonderful? So, Joe, how are you doing there, my friend?
Pretty good, pretty good. I hear you got some snow out there.
Yeah, just a little bit, I know a lot about snow. I used to be an avid skier.
Uh-huh.
And so I like to get it off the driveway and all of that, just to be on the safe side. I don't find the weather manner as reliable as people might think. And if it melts a little bit and then refreezes, it can be kind of challenging.
Yeah. Well, I was just listening to your Grail episode 4 with John, with Doug Gabriel, and almost finished it at the 1 hour. It was very, very interesting. It's amazing what you learn from things you already know. It really is, because do we really know anything? It becomes more and more absurd. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, explaining to her, I said, if you think you know anything, we've said this before, the minute you see something else, you're like, wow. And something else pops in your mind. And so you really have to be, I guess the word is humble. Just humility has to pour out of your pores with anthroposophy, Rosicrucianism, Rudolf Steiner. And but when I was listening to you and Doug, something kind of clicked in some. We're doing Grail language. I know you were doing more of the Grail mystery, but I thought about the word Steiner, and I'm looking down here at my screenshots. Steiner comes from a term used especially for a beer. It's a cup, and in German, name derived from stone or rock, stoneware, and it has a handle. Now they put the lid on the steins. They put them on during the bubonic plague to keep the flies out. That's when the lids went on. But the word Grail, the cup of Joseph of Arimathea, Steiner, Steiner being cupper. In other words, multiple cups. You're talking about the Nirmankaya and the different bodies of Christ. And I was like, wow, you could even, literally the language is saying something to you. I just thought it fascinating that the steins actually have a handle where you can grip separately the cup. And I wonder if the Holy Grail had a handle. I get into the absurd over here. So you always see the chat, and we know a little bit more about that. But it was neat to just see the play on words and the whole body of Grail.
Yes, and that kind of gave me food for thought. And it's interesting because I got an email from the Rudolf Steiner publishing, and I found an interesting quote of a book that's come out fairly recently, and we've made mention of it before, but it's The Occult Truths of Myths and Legends, Greek and Germanic Mythology, Richard Wagner in the Light of Spiritual Science. And this is part of the collected edition, and this is volume 92. But within that is that whole idea of the sacralism, that there's this whole idea of the dramatic features when you combine all the various arts together. And that's something that developed out of the ancient mysteries, where Rudolf Steiner is very clear about how all of these arts and sciences were all brought together, that they were one unitary thing, and that it was a way in which people could cultivate their relationship to the supersensible worlds. And so in light of that, I pulled out a quote that was the quote that made me think of it, because it was a blurb for the release of this particular volume that's been out for a while, less than a year. But, and I quote, it's from the lecture cycle, Sacramentalism, Daedalus and Icarus. It's a lecture given in Berlin on July 8th, 1904. You can't find this on YouTube, and you can't find it in the archive. It's only available in this printed edition. But I do have a link below, a tiny URL that can lead you to the page where the book is shown. And so here's the quotation. The essence of sacramentalism is that the human being fills everyday things with a sacred spiritual quality. The sense and point of the ancient legends was to bring about the right vibration in people's souls, so that they were filled with spiritual strength. Through this, the simplest action of a naive heart can be hallowed. We can try as hard as we like to bring harmony and order to the physical plane, but it will fail as long as we work only on the physical plane. Harmony created on the one side gives rise to disharmony on the other. But if you let the spiritual operate, you will see that everyday matters are approached in a completely different way. This is sacramentalism. So it's interesting that, you know, we didn't get a chance to talk before doing this, but what you just said dovetails precisely into what I just shared. And so that's the way it is. It has to do with that. My friend David Spangler, who I spent a lot of time with over the years, and he used to always talk about the sacredness of the ordinary,
Yeah.
right? And that it has to do with your perspective on the world in which you live, and maintaining a consciousness of the levels of soul and spirit from which we really, truly arise. People tend to get lost in the world of thinking that their state of being is a result of the chemical activity in their physical body somehow, in a mysterious way, that as we evolved out of some kind of microbial existence in a swamp, and then eventually got complex more and more as time went by, over millions of years, and which of course we know from spiritual science is exactly not what happened. And so that's the whole thing, that you know, those people think that we're a physical being, and that the state of our nature arises as a result of physical occurrences exclusively. And so that's their take. And they can go ahead and think that, but that doesn't lead you really anywhere. That leads you into, when this physical world finally ends its cycle, and that portion of your being just goes by the wayside. Of course, if you've attached yourself to that, and that becomes your future destiny. And it's covered in the catch-all phrase in occultism of the eighth sphere, that which is cast off, and will have like a kind of a moon existence in the next stage of evolution after the Earth is gone and the Jupiter condition arises. And so what can we do to keep our eyes moving toward that future? And Rudolf Steiner is very clear about how the mythic content of the ancient cultures was a means by which they could maintain or restore that sense of the sacred, and that the whole idea of the ritual activities that arose, especially with the introduction of fire, that fire gave something that could serve as a bridge to the supersensible world. And we can see that very strongly leading back to the early mysteries of the prehistoric mysteries of Zarathustra. And so that's something that one can keep in mind.
Usually when we hear the word sacred, immediately these walls go up in our mind, and we see maybe an altar, and we think of all the solemnness and the sacred. From what you're saying and what I'm experiencing, we all have, needs to be looked at much more as grace, which Doug was speaking about to you, about the gifts of Christ, and that episode 4, how none of us deserve any of it, all these gifts, and they are grace. There's something given that not yet earned. You can't earn it. It's bestowed. It's a gift. But in your everyday happening of the ordinary, I'd love to stick there for a couple minutes on that, because it usually gets divorced from sacredness. You wouldn't think of the ordinary as sacred. It's like an oxymoron. I'll give you a little, for instance, of a personal happening that happened a couple of days ago. And it happened in very strange. And after it all occurred, I went, wow, I have never done that. And this is what it was. I had to do a photo shoot with my girlfriend down at the beach. I went to the beach house, and then went to this gorgeous place called Ocean House. But we gave up on doing the photo shoot for one reason or the other. The day went by, the weather, the wind. And but I said, let's go to the Ocean House. I have an idea. Let's just go there for breakfast. And I'll take the camera along anyway. Maybe we'll get some pretty pictures. And we had lunch. We were out in this most fascinating building in Watch Hill, Rhode Island. And then we were in the restaurant, and I said, hey, let me take a couple pictures of you. We did that. And then we went out in the balcony. Let's take a couple more. Blah, blah, blah. We went to the beach. We did the most miraculous shoot you'd ever see. But I did not consciously intend to do the photo shoot when I decided to go to Ocean House. And it's not about a personality thing. What it is, and I've seen this with directors, when they teach directors how to direct actors, this because it happened naturally, but what it did is it removed all the anticipation, all the fear, all of the invasion of many things it would have liked in the normal planning of an event. And this could be done with anything. We've all done it probably once or twice serendipitously. We just end up somewhere or doing something, and maybe the tasks, as you were speaking about, the earthly things work themselves out, but they can work themselves out in such a unique way when we don't plan, anticipate, build up this event, no matter what the event is, how small it is, just allow ourselves to be relaxed. And this is where Michael Chekhov, the great actor and acting teacher, speaks about how if an actor was stressed and acting, and rather than saying stop, relax, if he said the word relax, the actor immediately would think, oh, I must be tense, and he'd make himself tense. So they came, could you do that again? Michael said, with a more feeling of a greater ease. Can you do that scene with much more ease? And so the actor did not get triggered. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. So right scattered in our ordinary life is the sacred, is the spiritual world awaiting for us to work out our daily tasks, our karma, whatever. And then there's other darker forces that would like to come through us and destroy all of our happenings. But there's a way to handle that by just doing things with a greater feeling of ease and actually preparing, but not putting the events in front of us. We interfere, and our fears interfere with so much of our own life. We get in the way of our lives for our daily mundane. And that's exactly, why would that be? Because the sacred is there. It's being prepared. I prepare us the table before you in the presence of mine enemies. David, 23rd Psalm, preparing the table before me in the presence of my enemies. And this is kind of what I'm speaking about, but it's hard to put into language. You'd have to use examples like I just kind of gave, where we ended up doing this. And when we finished, I went, I've never done a photo shoot this great. These photos are just remarkable. It's like a $10,000 shoot. Light was perfect. The actor was perfect. It all worked, but I didn't intend. I gave up on it. And I've done that before. But anyway, life is going to occur. And it's all going to happen. It's being prepared. But we, in our times, especially with the force and the speed and the technology, are driving ourselves on a highway to hell, with messing up our own, the spiritual world, preparing it for us. I'll stop it there. But I want to give you a little flavor of that sacred in the ordinary, the intuitive, serendipitous way that life is spread out from the smallest little things and furnitures and whatnot. And if we could just allow ourselves not to get in our own way or let other forces in.
Yes, and to continue on with a short piece relative to what I was just sharing with you, Rudolf Steiner in that same lecture says, Prometheus brought fire down from heaven. Making fire has given our culture its character. Just imagine how things would be if we had no fire. Everything of a rational and technological nature in our development is thanks to fire. Fire is that which brings things down to the physical plane. Material culture is due to fire. And so the priests had to see something special in fire. For this reason, in the second post-Atlantean cultural epoch, the Persian Magi saw that fire, above all, contained an element that was needed in sacraments. What did the Persian priest bring about through ceremonial procedures at the altar? Occultism knows that there were 7 Zoroasters. The Zoroaster known to history is the 7th. The Persian magus had a special way of generating fire. This procedure was a reflection of the great cosmic emergence of fire. There stood the Persian magus with his thyrsus and performed his ceremonies, which every occultist knows well, but only occultists. This procedure was a reflection of the great cosmic emergence of fire, when in the priest training schools they no longer understood how to generate fire with the thyrsus. They looked for fire from a source in nature. Initially, they got fire from lightning and then propagated it through the so-called eternal flame, where a new flame was only allowed to be lit from the old. Fire obtained from nature was thought to be more effective than fire produced artificially. End quote. I mean, I could go on and on because it's just such wonderful food for thought, so to speak. And that's that whole idea, because what does fire do? It's so transformative. When you take something and you put it through fire, it changes its state of being. And if you look at fire in the sense of spiritual science, we know that the old Saturn, the first condition of our chain of evolution, you know, the 3 planetary conditions before the Earth even existed, it arose through fire from the thrones donating the spirits of will, as Rudolf Steiner describes them. And that primal warmth is the essential core of our being. And so out of that experience of fire eventually leads to the old sun condition, in which light is added to this idea of fire. And so you have that whole idea of the warmth and the light. And as Rudolf Steiner once said, wisdom dwells in the light. And so if you're looking at the sun, you're looking at the actual expression of wisdom coming toward you, right? Because remember, he, and I've explained this before, but he says if you want to understand the etheric, it's helpful, and I'm paraphrasing, if you look out into empty space and the blueness of the sky, you're seeing an expression of the realm of the etheric that comes toward you out of the past. Whereas with the astral, if you look at all the stars in the sky and the light coming towards you, that's an expression of the astral. And that you have that idea of these various levels of being that participate in levels of being of your own nature. And by becoming aware of this reality and being mindful, I like the word mindful because it says that you have a certain presence of mind and that you can give yourself kind of a cadence or a rhythm into life to where you approach things circumspect, thoughtfully. That's that whole idea of being mindful. That it was what David Spangler was pointing at when he talked about the sacredness of the ordinary. And so keep in mind, again, that Rudolf Steiner said there are no insignificant events.
And the mindfulness is also, isn't that one of the Eightfold Path, Buddha's Eightfold Path, right? Mindfulness? I believe it is. And maybe that was the word I was looking for when I said we were going to the beach. We decided not to do something, but in the back of my mind, I did bring things, and we worked the whole place for lunch ended up becoming the setting for something, but my mind was not really, I went along intuitively with and that's not like me. Normally I'm a planner, but it's amazing. Well, so what is mindfulness? Really, what is it mindfulness? What state of being are you in to be truly mindful? The world would think today, technologically or through business, that it would be something that makes people specific planning mind, as a task oriented, whatever. But is that mindfulness, or is there a higher mind and different minds? I know that, I'm sure you had the experience too. When you're on a site, you're doing a construction project, you're doing your work, then you've got to be mindful of what? The cleaning crew, mindful of OSHA regulations, mindful of, that's all in our world. But there are levels of this mindfulness. I didn't think of that. So how much more in our ordinary life are we not mindful of that's occurring, and we're just unconscious of it? We're not even integrating it into our daily lives, but it's there waiting. Heaven is waiting for us. The hierarchies are waiting for us. And there is plenty of time. I think you've mentioned before, John, and it is really a trap in our time that people believe they're getting older, or it takes too long. They can't make enough money to get the things they wish they had, blah, blah, blah. But it is that time element that causes fear. There isn't enough yet with this mindfulness and this serendipity and this whole thing you're speaking about, Rudolf Steiner's addressing. There is plenty of time. There is just not plenty of activity to be aware, because as we become more aware, it changes our perspective on everything. And really, I think our times we're living in could really use more mindfulness about who we are, all these different things that are occurring to us in our daily life, all the powers, whether we understand all these technical things of anthroposophy or not. How much is being made for us? How much do we truly preparing our own daily lives? I think we prepare less than the hierarchies. I think we prepare this much a day, and so much more is being prepared for us. And we don't give that world the acknowledgement. If we don't understand it, we don't acknowledge it. And I think that's what really has to happen: the acknowledgement of events and hierarchies, if you'd like to call them that, positive and negative, that are working in our daily lives. And we don't have all the control of our lives. And to say that to someone today would make them afraid. But we really don't have as much control over our lives as we think.
Yes, and there's so much we know from Rudolf Steiner in spiritual science. He talks about the development of the human being, and that anthroposophy is really the art of becoming human, or becoming fully human. And in understanding what that might mean, it's very helpful if you begin to become mindful of the various parts of your being that contribute to this whole gestalt that is you. And so, for example, just to be able to make the distinction between thinking and feeling and will. I mean, that's a big step. Most people don't even get to that point. They just kind of go through it, and it never really crosses their mind that there's value in just considering the dynamic relationship between the thinking and feeling and will. You know, I mean, you say to somebody, well, what do you think about this? And they go, well, I feel, you know, or you think you're going to do something, but your feelings kind of coerce you into doing something. Other than that, at least you feel you are. But then in the end, what you end up doing is actually different than the other two. And so you see that there's these various forces that are working in your lives that bring you into the realm of activity. And it's interesting because your basic, what said to the disciples said to Jesus, how shall we know the Christians? And he said, well, you will know them by their deeds. So it's what you actually do. You might have a kind of a darkening thought go through your mind, but if you don't act on it, well, you just missed that one. So you're only darkening a part of your being, not the whole thing, and creating the karma that would be associated with taking some dark action in the world upon somebody. And so it's having mindfulness enables one to not be just reactive, because if you're in a situation where you just have a reactive personality, it's a stimulus response. You have a saying that oh, he's out of control, meaning that there's somebody who's so impulsive that they can't help it. They have to act in that fashion. They haven't gotten to the point of mindfulness to where they can make decisions about these things.
Yes, and that brings me another thought. Again, this ordinary, the sacred in the ordinary, and language, because that's what this show is about. We don't address it. People may be thinking we're not speaking about the language of the Grail language, but what is the Grail language? What is it in your own personal life daily, whether you pick up anthroposophy or not, that you're able to understand the intuitions that come to you, decipher between them and the fears, between peer pressures, between all those false cups. Like Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they had all the cups in front of them, choose wisely which one is the one of Jesus. So what language is being said? The Tower of Babel is occurring every day in our minds. All the voices, all the thoughts, all the choices, all of the world and the propaganda and the Madison Avenue and fears and karma for other lives, a whole bunch is coming. And then that voice, that language, and we may not hear it as words. And think about this, when you get an intuition, simple intuitions. I had one this morning. It's very small, but I knew it was an intuition but how did I get there? And how do we get there? Sometimes people hear. Sometimes people see a picture. Sometimes they just grab it like a fish you pull up and you don't know where it came from. But there is a language being spoken. We are communicating with the spiritual world. But what is it always in sound? Is it always, how do we hear it versus the other voices and other things that are coming at us? I think everyone who's had a daily intuition about anything, I got to go to the hardware store. No, I better do this. All these things that you think and you're not thinking, but they're suggestions or things that are coming up. There is communications going on. If you don't want to call it language, there's communications going on all the time. And how many times have we said, I knew it. Darn it, I knew it. I knew it. I heard it. I should have. And I did. What's wrong with me? We've all done that. There's communications from the spiritual world, and it's not just your subconscious mind trying to equate this and get to you. Because I have one question: where the hell is the subconscious mind? Which organ? Where does it sit? I need to know where that is.
Yes. And so taking an assessment and an evaluation of your day is one of the subsidiary exercises, the 6 fundamental exercises that Rudolf Steiner gave. It's called the Rückschau, and that's at the end of the day reviewing your life in reverse order of that day. Just like keep going back in time, because that's in keeping with at the end of your life, once you leave this physical existence as whoever you are, that you will go back through your life. You'll review the course of your life in reverse order. And so it's very natural to approach your relationship to that realm in that way. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is clarify and bring about a catharsis, first of the astral, of that desire nature, that part of your being that you share with the animal kingdom that gave you an ability of movement. And so within your physical being, that would be represented, the physical image of that is your nervous system, whereas the glandular system is the etheric. And then you have your physical, well, that's, the bones and the things that are just so firmly structured. But Rudolf Steiner talks about when you go to sleep at night, people don't really think about it, but when your astral body and your ego leave your physical body and etheric on the bed, and they go off into the astral world and the world of dream and even deep dreamless sleep. But what is happening with the physical and etheric body that's laying there on the bed? He says that higher beings are enabled to work through on our behalf, but we're unconscious of it. And so keeping that in mind, there's another level of that in which when one commits oneself to the Grail quest, so to speak, to be a servant of Christ, that if you could bring that mindfulness during your day, then at night, it enables the Christ to work with you more intimately while you're asleep. And that's a really a powerful thing that one can bring to your life, and to have that sense of the sacred, especially when falling asleep, so that it's as if you're intentionally moving into the adytum, that you're going into the sacred nature of sleep. And it can be healing and transformative to be able to do it in such a manner. Rudolf Steiner, in that same lecture, the last paragraph says, people need to create a spiritual life again that reaches into every hand movement and every step. And introducing this once more is the task and aspiration of the spiritual movement. The sacramental attitude of earlier times must return. We need to realize that there is a difference in acting out of the spirit or out of matter. Letting spiritual life flow once more, that is our goal. And so it's essentially a description of what we're doing here, the reason we're doing it. That's the point of all this, is to be able to actually consciously participate in the process of clarification, because our higher vehicles are fashioned out of the ego's ability to work into the astral, to work into the etheric, and work into even the physical. Because when the ego is able to work into the astral, then that brings about the spirit self. When the ego can work into the etheric body, that brings about the Buddhic principle or life spirit. And then, of course, the Atman is that physical nature, and that's only from much more advanced students than I, but it's what we have to look forward to, is that by the end of Earth evolution, Christ has already shown us through the total conquering of death and the resurrection of his total being as a human being, a spiritual human being, though. He's given us the example, and through spiritual economy, we know that we have that template to be able to guide us into our development into the future.
Yep. Hopefully I can be heard on my new earpieces. Give me a thumbs up. We got a thumbs up here?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm sorry. I had to put the earpieces on. There's all kinds of noise outside. That is a really good statement, John, because what happens is we're losing track of the fact that in our daily life, what is coming into our body from the angel kingdom at night when we leave, the work that's being done on us. I didn't want to say it that way when I was speaking earlier about those voices in our head or all those different things that are coming around us, but there are a multitude of beings within our bodies that are doing much work. And I alluded to that with this much of our life. Are we doing this much? So much is being done for us that if we acknowledge it, that there is activity, and just dwell with that idea that there's activity during the daily life, then that will actually change. That's the part of us that changes.
Yeah, again, that brings us back to wonder, awe, and reverence, which we keep returning to again and again. You know, to have that sense of wonder, the sense of the quest, to have that sense of awe in the recognition of the absolutely fantastic panorama of being that's laid before you by the understanding of spiritual science. And then so you have wonder, awe, and then reverence is that you have to bow your head in acknowledgement of it's just this fantastic grace that's been given to you. And there you have it, because to proceed through life gracefully means to be filled with grace as one goes through life. That's that mindfulness.
Correct. And I think for me, we only have ourselves to talk about. Sometimes it's crazy, but you have to take everything you have and then not personalize them, but try to look at it. That's what this is about. Taking your actual experiences and saying, this is what happened to me. This is what friends of mine said this, and this is where we get into the individual. But and you see this in your religion. So many people are like, I was born again, or I did this and I did that, and this happened to me, and they're just full of grace and they want to share it. The wonder that occurs when you start to understand more of what Rudolf Steiner speaks about, addressing the angels in the astral body, the more that comes to people is the fact that the awareness that everyone is having this happen to them, and almost none of us are acknowledging it or understanding. And the religions have given us nothing but it's a mystery, my son. And so when we are participating, no matter how small, with this information, we actually are able to commune. And that's real communion. I guess that's what I want to say. The acknowledgement, little by little, every day, is a communion with the hierarchies.
Yes, Rudolf Steiner is very clear in it's in his Rosicrucian esotericism lecture cycle, where he points towards in what lecture 3, I believe, but he points towards, and that's available here on the YouTube. So you just put in Rosicrucian esotericism, Rudolf Steiner, and you'll find it. But then he gets into explaining the various principles of the being a man, talking about how through this catharsis we transform the astral, and through our ability to work into the etheric body, we develop the life spirit, and that then with the physical being an expression of that higher Atman, that universal principle that first came into manifestation as far as we're concerned in old Saturn conditions, so that you, by being able to learn this Christ language, to be able to actually think about what I just said in a meaningful way, is helpful towards giving you a bridge to the reality of the supersensible. And it's key, because if you utter a falsehood, there's nothing in the world that can meet it, because it's not true. It's not related to something that exists. And Rudolf Steiner said, just go out there and tell the truth, and let people, do with it what they will or not. But they've been given that opportunity, and not that you want to compel anybody to believe into the ideas about Atlantis and Lemuria and all the various conditions of the earth. Not everybody's ready to be considering those ideas as of yet. They haven't even figured out that they have thinking, feeling, and will, and so you have to be graceful in your relationship with other people. Give them the opportunity to be able to cross the bridge if they so choose, because that's the whole key to understanding this, is that freedom aspect is something that has to be able to be included in the equation for this Christ mystery, because it's not anything that's compelled. There's not going to be an inquisition regarding the contents of this talk. It's just, we're just having this conversation, and in that gives us an opportunity to be able to share a moment in time and come into relationship with spiritual beings that are behind the ideas of which you're referring, and getting to the point to realize that that's a reality and not just a poetic metaphor or a figurative example, but there actually are spiritual beings behind the things of the world. And that's the reason why Rudolf Steiner said that there are no insignificant moments, because that all those beings are present all the time. And so the more you become aware of it, the more wholesomely you can go about your business and realize that you are working with something that's absolutely divine. I mean, it's the idea that you participated in the divine is probably one of the most rewarding thoughts that one can contemplate.
Well, I think, let me take these off. See.
Outside. All right, we're back. There are so many contradictions in religions, in science, in technology, in politics. The world right now is so loaded with contradictions, and I believe this is the greatest time of all, because the youth are armed with the technology, they're armed with the newness, they're looking at the whole world from our generation to before, and all the videos from World War II and 1901 right up in a span of time, and are looking at all the things that are contradictory, and they're going to have no place to go, whether it's under the brand of Rudolf Steiner, anthroposophy, Rosicrucian, whatever the brand is, the label, let's call it that. They're going to seek to understand why there's contradictions, maybe throughout the whole damn thing, and decide to come up with their own way of Atlantis and Lemuria. Nothing after these aliens have been all over the place. Nothing for the youth. Let's just call them 16-year-olds and up right now. Nothing in their mind is going to make them think of the way we were raised. And there's not enough propaganda. There's not enough religious influence. And I really think they are the freest generation that's very young right now that will have, you talk about the Grail, handed to them on a silver platter, all of this information, all of the world is what's happening is I think it's going to be presented. It's going to be sought out, which is why we do what we do, and so many others are coming out right now, pushing out our ideas, actually sharing them, which many of us never did for decades. It is that time when this is the only answer. It's called the truth. and it's out there. And so I'm very hopeful. I know I don't want to bring up, we're moving away from the ideas you spoke about, but they are setting the stage, and because of the contradictions, the lies, the hypocrisies, the whole bit. And so I've said this on your show before, but I really believe this is the most important time to spread anthroposophy now, in juxtaposition to the chaos and the crumbling civilization, the pretend civilization, let's call it that, because the real civilization is through anthroposophy. It's been waiting in the wings for 100 years, and I think its time has come.
Yes, well, it's an interesting time in which we live, because just as we're moving into a period where the consciousness soul is to be transformed into the spiritual soul, and then in the future that the sixth period that we talked about, Douglas and I, over the last couple of conversations, but that in moving toward that heart culture of the sixth period is what we're talking about. And so that mindfulness is the component that brings you to the threshold of that experience. And in being able to consciously participate in that mindfulness, that you're doing it for a reason. You're not just doing it just to do it. You're doing it because it's an acknowledgement of your awareness of the sacredness of life. And that's the important point. Not that you have to be stiff or anything. It's just a certain edge that it gives you on the world, and knowing that there's literally choirs of angels assisting you in your journey is really a revitalizing experience. And it's funny because if one comes into a relationship with that over time, you feel a sense of warmth in your heart, that it actually is transformative, and that you can actually feel and sense the change of the character and the kind of thoughts that you come around to.
Well, I think that's the whole point. Like when we were younger, you go to church on Sunday and you dress up in your Sunday finest. You go to school. This is when you go to the country club. There's been so many Puritan do's and don'ts that life really has not been lived organically and naturally in our lifetime since we were younger. If you think about it, we move from thing to thing to thing. And of course, there's ritual and there's procedures, but no one's been able to live normal where we can actually address truths or possibilities of other worlds and other beings. Nothing's been allowed all these decades. We haven't been allowed to speak because the dogma and the doctrines that have been put out there from the secular world as well as the religious sphere have made people into, partial people, fragmented and segmented personalities.
Well, that's a real key, because if you look, you say, well, okay, the spiritual path will lead us to imagination, inspiration, and intuition. So the thinking, the feeling, and the will to become transformed. But what we find surrounding us culturally, we have, instead of working into the realm of imagination, we have digital devices that do that for us. Right, and so you have all of these manner of technologies that are giving us substitutions for principles that we should be developing out of our own being. And that's a key concept to work with, because you can get so sucked into, so fascinated by this world of technology that you don't bother getting around to working on your own inherent capacities. And that's one of the dangers of dealing with technology, is be swallowed whole, basically, and until you're just a null, and it is giving you the content of your consciousness at all times. You have to be able to step back from these things, gather yourself, and return to nature, so to speak, return to something to where you can actually hear the supersensible in an essence or feel its presence.
Well, if people didn't recognize, we are living in the times when that activity you're addressing is to steal and swallow our soul. It's not an activity that's just out there doing its own thing and you can participate if not. It's completely swarming humanity and looking to suck humanity into this one big eighth sphere vacuum cleaner, little by little over the years. And it's accelerating right now. So this is not an innocent activity. And there is no half measures. You're either going to think or you're going to be a spectator in an artificial realm that's feeding you thoughts and ideas. And the more you watch it, the less you're able to think. Again, not that you don't want to watch TV and do all these things, but it's ramping up its activity. So there's no room to even think. There's no time to think. And normally, never mind about spiritual or any other issues. It's just this activity is growing, and I believe that it will overwhelm the youth. We're just going to get tired of it. They're not going to be dealing with it the way a star burns bright before it burns out, and technology is burning very, very bright right now. Look for it to plateau and sink down. It'll be there, but the public will get tired of it invading every aspect of their life, especially Americans.
Well, we're being led really to a threshold experience as human beings. Everybody is. They're being given the opportunity to make those choices. And the first lecture in this book that I made reference to earlier is the lecture on good and evil. And it's June 24th, 1904. And in there he says, all physical events are the shadows of supersensory events. The battle between spiritual forces and materialism is a reflection of the battle between the hosts of Beelzebub and Mammon against Michael. This battle had to be fought first on the higher planes. It was won there by Michael 30 years ago. Of course, that's 1879 in November that he's making reference to. And I continue. And the present battle here on the physical plane is a reflection of it. Above, the battle has been decided, but for the individual human being, it is not finished yet. If the human beings of today are not equal to this, we will all have to perish, and new human beings would have to come. This shows us the juncture, the path that the individual today needs to take, end quote. And so that's pretty definitive. And in looking at the events that are surrounding us in the world, there's much that needs to be met with courage. And so it's that heart force that's going to be able to lead one into the future. So you see just as you see the etheric coming to you from the past, you see the astral coming towards you from the future. That's the light coming from the future. That reflects on that etheric nature, that vehicle of memory and life. And so it behooves us to keep reminding ourselves of the reality of these aspects of our being that we're not aware of. And in doing that, that gives us an opportunity to gain that clarification. Well, since Joe's off somewhere, I may as well get this covered here. I am the author of 2 books. The first book is 640 pages. That's Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and to the true Rosicrucian Order. As a forward by my good buddy Douglas Gabriel, a great many diagrams. And this is currently out of print, but I hope to be able to get that back out again in a book on demand form. But this is still available, my second volume, The Arcana of Light on the Path. And this has a foreword by the noted astronomer and psychologist William Bento. And included in both books are the Grail diagrams, as I call them, that give you the cosmology of Rudolf Steiner's work, although I added a great many more in this second volume. And so it can help you, give you food for thought to have that mindfulness. And this book is available from me on eBay, or you can contact me by private message. There's a link below to my academia webpage. You can contact me there by private message on Facebook. Although Facebook, to be honest, the messaging system has been pretty wonky lately, so you might want to try doing it through the academia link. But, and I also want to really move this out of the way first, acknowledge that this podcast has been made possible by the generous support of Tyla and Douglas and Vadim and Vivian and Jenna and Neil and Lee and Tom and Christian and Mark and Maud and Drewman and Laura and Paul and Rick and Ray and Whitney and James and Marilyn and Anil and Fred and Ishtar and Anna, all these wonderful people that over the years have somehow contributed or thought I at least deserved a cup of coffee for my efforts, and I really appreciate it. And don't forget to click like and subscribe to my channel so you can stay up on all the things that we're trying to share here. But I think I want to, I love this poem so much, I'm going to share it with you, even though I've shared it to you before. And it's the alchemical poem that I translated out of French by the Comte de Saint-Germain. Curious scrutator of the whole of nature, I have known the great all, its principle and its end. I have seen gold deep in its power, deep within the mind. I have seized its material and surprised its leaven. I explain by what art the soul within the mother's womb makes its home, carries it out, and as a grape seed placed against a grain of wheat under the humid earth. The one plant and the other vine are the bread and wine. Nothing was, God willed, and nothing became something. In my doubting, I sought out that on which the universe is poised. Nothing appeared to sustain the equilibrium or to serve as a support. Finally, with the weights of praise and of blame, I weighed the eternal. It called my soul. I died, I adored. I knew nothing more. And so with that, I want to thank you all. And I think I remembered everything. If I forgot something, well, geez, I'm sorry. But I guess I have to be more mindful. Joe, thank you so much for showing up and everybody for being here. And this has been another wonderful journey.